And welcome to this week's Read the Text. And we will be spending time with Habakkuk chapter 4, verses 4 through 20, because that's the passage that we'll be looking at Sunday. And just a quick reminder that the point of this is not to preach the sermon early. Rather, the point of this is to look at the text as closely as we can to see whether or not there are things here that we might miss if we pass through it too quickly. And it's a long text, and so we won't be working through it maybe in quite the detail that we otherwise would. Um, the idea is that the passage is confronting the idea of um, the proud believe that they can secure life apart from God. And so they trust in things like power and wealth and violence in the case of Babylon. And so, really, the idea of the text is sort of this what we'll call the anatomy of pride. And you'll note as you move through this that the text is structured around a series of woe statements. And a woe statement is, well, the basic idea is that it is a curse. And so we just move through it. Behold his soul. Remember, this is referring to the king of Babylon. Most likely it's Nebuchadnezzar, but there is some question about that. But what's not in question is that it is a indictment against the king and therefore the entire nation. And so in verse 4, you have these two people. You have the one whose soul is puffed up, not upright within him. And then you have this but, and the second person is the one that is known by righteousness, right? But the righteous shall live by his faith. And what you're going to find is that the rest of chapter 2 is going to describe this person. And then chapter 3 is going to be an example of this person. And so let's look at the one whose soul is puffed up and not upright within him. So in verses 4 and 5, we might think of these two verses as kind of the hinge. This is where the book sort of shifts and the letter shifts to this description of the proud and then the example of the righteous. And we can see here, moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects as his own all peoples. And then beginning in verse 6, we have these series of woes. And so here's the first woe statement. And so we'll just label this as number 1. And then we come down here to verse 9, and here's number 2. And then we come to verses 12 through 14. Here's number 3. And then verses 15 through 17 is number 4. So there's our woe. So that's number 4. And then we have the last one is down here in verse, it's actually verse 18, but we don't see the woe until verse 19. But the entire statement is here. And so we'll just label this number 5. And so going back to these woe statements, what exactly is being condemned and how exactly are the proud described? Well, verses 6 through 8 is describing the problem of greed. Okay, and so just look at some of these key words that we see. Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. Loads himself with pledges or debts. Will not your debtors, there's the idea again, suddenly arise, and those awake who will make you tremble, then you will be spoil for them. because you have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the peoples shall plunder you. And so it's kind of the idea of what you sow, you will eventually reap. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. So number one is greed. And then the second woe is here, and it's similar to greed, but there's a slight and subtle difference. So we'll call the second woe, let's call this security um, um, through unjust gain. So woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. And so here the idea is trying to find security by building your house higher. You have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples. You have forfeited your life. And then it continues, for the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork respond. Woe number three is the idea of violence. And this, again, is a description of ancient Babylon. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk in order to gaze at their nakedness. And so, along with violence is this idea of humiliation of their opponents. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. So there will come a day when you will pay for what you've done. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. So again, just like before, you will reap what you have sown. And so here we have this idea, and it is a parallel to earlier in the passage where the idea is that you will receive what you've given out. The violence, verse 17, done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, as will the destruction of the beast that terrified them. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. And so, whether you want to call it what goes around comes around, or whether you want to call it reaping what you sow, I prefer reaping what you sow because it's more biblical. But that's the idea. That, remember, Habakkuk's question was, will this go on forever? Like, Lord, will you not ever intervene? And we saw that on Sunday. And God's answer, of course, is no. That there will come a point where they will answer for what they've done. So we moving then into so we have violence, we have humiliation, and then coming down to verses 18 through 20, we have idolatry, and that's what's condemned here. So you have, what profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker, so here we have maker, and we have maker here also, trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. There's the word idol again. Woe to him who says to a wood thing, awake, right? Like you wouldn't make a table out of wood and then tell it to speak, and to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Well, of course not. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath in it at all. So it's not living. So again, what's being condemned here is idolatry. And then we come to verse 20, which is very important. And so you have this idea of idols and who can't speak, and they don't live and they don't breathe. And then all of that contrasted here with the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. And so, despite the way things look, God is in his holy temple and he will have the last word. Okay, so that's looking at Habakkuk chapter 4, verses 4 through 20. And we will dive into this in more detail on Sunday. See you then.